the summer of 1944, Allied tanks rolled into Normandy in France, only to meet a deadly wall of German armor. Panthers and Tigers dominated the battlefield, outgunning and out-armoring anything the Allies could throw at them. Even the more common Panzer IVs and Stugs, deployed in massive numbers, tore through advancing columns with brutal efficiency. The Allies quickly realized that they had a hard time fighting German tanks and moved forward. But the British had brought a secret weapon to Normandy, built in haste but with purpose. A modified Sherman, armed with a gun powerful enough to take on the Reich's heavy armor, the Sherman Firefly. Among the most potent Allied conversions of the war, and certainly one of the deadliest versions of the Sherman, it was a clever, although risky and improvised move to try to keep up with the latest German tank developments. This is the story of the Sherman Firefly, the British conversion that turned the tide against Germany's most feared tanks and gave Allied crews a real shot at survival in the deadly tank battles of Normandy. Faced with the destructive power of the German tanks from the opening campaigns through North Africa, the British sought to reinforce their armored fleet. They wanted to equip themselves with a tank hunter that they were sorely lacking at the time. A debate followed over which platform to use. Initially, British designers resisted modifying the American-made Sherman, citing concerns about space and recoil management. But practical considerations soon overruled reservations. The Sherman was available in large numbers. Over 7,000 had been supplied to British forces, and its chassis offered a reliable and mobile foundation. The solution was to mount the formidable quick-firing 17-pounder, a 76.2mm anti-tank gun, into the Sherman's turret. It was no simple task. Internal components had to be rearranged, and the breech had to be rotated sideways to fit, but the result was a powerful tank capable of penetrating the armor of the Tiger I at standard engagement ranges. The heart of the Sherman Firefly's transformation lay in its gun, the British Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder. This was no ordinary anti-tank gun. At 76.2mm and 55 calibers in length, it was a high-velocity gun capable of firing a variety of ammunition types: high explosive, heat, and most importantly, armor-piercing rounds. With conventional APCBC rounds, it could penetrate up to 120 to 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. But with its breakthrough APDS armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds, muzzle velocity spiked to an astonishing 1,200 meters per second, allowing it to punch through up to 208 millimeters of armor at combat ranges. In practical terms, it could defeat any German tank then in service, including the feared Tiger and Panther. The 17-pounder was ready as early as 1941 and entered service in 1943, seeing its first action in Tunisia. It quickly proved itself in Sicily and Italy, where the limitations of the smaller 6-pounder became obvious. British designers began looking for ways to mount the 17-pounder on mobile platforms. Yet fitting such a long and heavy gun into a tank turret was no easy task. The recoil system had to be redesigned, the breech rotated sideways, and ammunition storage modified. These technical challenges delayed its integration into British tanks. Interim solutions appeared: the Archer, the Achilles, a converted M10, and later the Challenger and Comet, but it was the Sherman Firefly that ultimately carried the gun in the largest numbers. More than just a bigger gun, the 17-pounder turned the Sherman from underdog to tank killer. It gave British and Commonwealth tank crews the confidence to engage German armor on more equal footing, and for the first time to stop a Tiger tank head-on. However, the APDS was not without its drawbacks. While it could achieve astonishing penetration figures, it lacked precision, especially at longer distances. Its 50mm subcaliber core, while fast and sharp, had less post-penetration effect than the more stable APCBC rounds. In short, the APDS could punch through, but wasn't always lethal once it got inside. Even so, the combination of a powerful gun, a versatile platform, and high-penetration ammunition made the Firefly one of the few Allied tanks in 1944 that could go toe-to-toe with Germany's armored elite and come out on top. Production of the Sherman Firefly began in January 1944, and by the end of May, just days before D-Day, 342 had been delivered to General Montgomery's 21st Army Group. This allowed British and Commonwealth armored troops to standardize a formation of 3 regular Shermans paired with 1 Firefly in each troop, providing much-needed firepower against German armor. A similar mix was adopted in Cromwell-equipped units, though this introduced logistical complications. Cromwell troops now required support for 2 different tank types, and the Firefly's slower speed compared to the Cromwell-created operational mismatches. Churchill tank units, on the other hand, did not receive Fireflies at all. To compensate, they often relied on attached M10 tank destroyers or M10 Achilles vehicles equipped with the 17-pounder to engage enemy tanks their own guns couldn't defeat. While not perfect, the Firefly's deployment strategy ensured that at least 1 tank per troop could take on Germany's most formidable panzers, an essential advantage during the hard fighting in Normandy and beyond. As D-Day approached, the Sherman Firefly was quietly integrated into the Allied armored forces. By early 1944, Allied intelligence had begun to grasp a worrying trend. The Germans were fielding far more Panthers than previously believed. Initial assumptions had cast the Panther as a rare, specialized heavy tank, much like the Tiger. But statistical analysis from the front told a different story. Panthers weren't just appearing in isolated numbers, they were forming the backbone of German panzer divisions in the West. This revelation came late. Many Allied planners had prepared for a campaign against lighter German armor, and standard Sherman tanks were still armed with 75mm guns, effective against older panzers, but dangerously inadequate against the frontal armor of Panthers. For frontline tank crews, the surprise was deadly. Panthers could engage from long range with their high-velocity guns, while most Shermans had to close the distance just to stand a chance. The Sherman Firefly, armed with the 17-pounder, was the only Allied tank in Normandy that could reliably destroy Panthers and Tigers from a distance. Just as German armor surged in strength and numbers, the Firefly arrived, right on time. Ken Tout, who served as a gunner and later a tank commander in the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry during the Normandy campaign of 1944, described the dramatic changes and challenges brought by the 17-pounder gun mounted in the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly tank is an ordinary Sherman, but to accommodate the immense breech of the 17-pounder and store its massive shells, the co-driver's position was removed. His small compartment was repurposed for ammunition storage. Tout also highlighted the striking physical effects of the gun in action. The flash is so brilliant that both gunner and commander must blink at the moment of firing. Otherwise, they're blinded long enough to miss seeing the impact. The muzzle blast is so fierce that after a shot or two, any hedge or undergrowth in front of the tank is likely to catch fire. He also noted the awkwardness of maneuvering with the long 17-pounder gun. When on the move, the length of the barrel, whether facing forward or swung to the side, means the crew must constantly watch out. It's all too easy to catch it on a tree, lamppost, or even a nearby building. Despite these challenges, the 17-pounder gave British crews the firepower they had long been lacking, transforming the Firefly into one of the few Allied tanks capable of reliably defeating Germany's most powerful armored vehicles at long range. Although Panthers and Tigers made up only about 30% of the roughly 2,300 German armored fighting vehicles deployed in Normandy, their presence posed a major threat. The majority of German tanks were Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz IIIs, and other models that standard 75mm Shermans could handle reasonably well. However, due to the strategic focus on Caen and the nature of Montgomery's operations in the eastern sector, British and Commonwealth forces ended up engaging over 70% of all German armor committed during the Normandy campaign. This included many of the Wehrmacht's and Waffen-SS's best-equipped panzer divisions. As a result, British and Canadian tank units found themselves more frequently facing heavily armored Panthers and Tigers, vehicles their standard tanks struggled to defeat head-on. The Sherman Firefly, with its powerful 17-pounder gun, became a critical asset. For commanders in the field, the Firefly was the best hope for countering Germany's armored elite. Numerous demonstrations of this enhanced firepower occurred on the Normandy battlefields in the days following the landings. June 9, 1944, just 3 days after D-Day. The village of Norrey-en-Bessin, held by Canadian forces, stood as a critical point in the Allied defensive line in Normandy. The German 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, under Kurt Meyer, launched a determined assault to break through and push the Allies back into the sea. At 1300 hours, 12 Panther tanks from the 3rd Company of the 12th SS Panzer Regiment advanced rapidly towards Norrey-en-Bessin, intending to overrun the Canadian positions. However, they quickly outpaced their infantry support, which was pinned down by effective Allied artillery fire. Awaiting the German advance was Lieutenant G.K. Henry, commanding a Sherman Firefly of the 1st Hussars. Concealed and strategically positioned, Henry and his crew prepared to engage the approaching Panthers. As the Panthers came within 1,000 meters, Henry's gunner, Trooper Chapman, held his fire until the enemy tanks were aligned. Then, in rapid succession, Chapman fired 6 rounds, successfully knocking out 5 Panther tanks. The remaining German tanks were forced to retreat, their assault effectively repelled. This action not only showcased the formidable firepower of the Sherman Firefly but also marked a turning point in the Normandy campaign, demonstrating that with proper tactics and equipment, Allied forces could counter and defeat Germany's heavy armor. On June 14, 1944, just days after the D-Day landings, British forces were engaged in a grinding fight to push south of Bayeux. As part of Operation Perch, Sergeant Harris of the 7th Dragoon Guards was supporting infantry who had just driven German defenders out of the small village of Lingevres, near Tilly-sur-Seulles. With his Sherman Firefly positioned in a defensive spot on the outskirts of town, accompanied by 3 standard Shermans, Harris scanned the eastern approaches through his binoculars. He soon spotted 2 Panther tanks moving cautiously across the open ground toward his position. Remaining calm, Sergeant Harris took aim and fired. At a range of 800 meters, the first shot from his 17-pounder gun slammed into the lead Panther, knocking it out instantly. The second round found its mark just as quickly, 2 Panthers destroyed back-to-back. Then, Harris made a calculated decision that reflected the training and adaptability of Firefly crews. He repositioned to a flanking spot on the other side of Lingevres, concealing his tank and watching the western road into town. Moments later, 3 more Panthers appeared, advancing, unaware of the ambush waiting for them. Harris and his gunner, Trooper McKillop, engaged them one by one, firing 3 well-aimed rounds and successfully knocking out all 3. It was a textbook example of what the Firefly could achieve in skilled hands. From a well-prepared defensive position, Harris and McKillop knocked out 5 Panthers with just 5 rounds, a clear demonstration of how the Firefly could turn the tables even against Germany's most formidable tanks. Perhaps their most famous engagement involving Fireflies took place during Operation Totalize. In the early hours of August 8, 1944, British and Canadian forces launched Operation Totalize, a bold push south of Caen aimed at breaking German resistance. As part of the offensive, tanks from the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, attached to the 33rd Armoured Brigade, reached the small French village of Saint-Aignan-de-Crampesnil. While some units held the village, A and C squadrons moved into a nearby wooded area known as Del de la Roque. Hidden beneath the trees, No. 3 Troop of A Squadron set up on the western edge of the woods, overlooking a wide stretch of open ground, and Route Nationale 158, the main road leading north from the German-held town of Sinthos. Then, they saw movement on the horizon, dust rising, engines rumbling. A column of German armor was approaching, 4 Tiger tanks from the elite 101st SS Heavy Tank Battalion, accompanied by Panzer IVs and Stug IVs. The order was clear: hold fire until the enemy closed the distance. Every shot had to count. Inside the Firefly codenamed Velikai Luki, gunner Joe Ekins, just 21 years old and yet to fire a shot in combat, waited behind the massive 17-pounder gun. As the German Tigers rumbled into range, the command came through. Ekins opened fire. The first Tiger erupted in flames. He reloaded and hit the second, another kill. The third Tiger tried to maneuver, but it too was knocked out. In less than 12 minutes, Ekins had destroyed 3 Tiger tanks, sending shockwaves through the German column. As German armor shifted to confront C Squadron on the opposite flank, A Squadron repositioned to support. In the following clash, Ekins struck again, this time knocking out a Panzer IV. But then his Firefly was hit. The crew bailed out. Ekins survived the battle, and his astonishing performance that day remains one of the most famous Firefly engagements of the war. For decades, historians debated whether it was Ekins who delivered the fatal shot to famed German tank ace, Michael Wittmann. Some credited Ekins' tank with the kill. But later photographic evidence suggests Wittmann's Tiger was likely destroyed from the left side, at close range, possibly by Canadian Fireflies from the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. Regardless of who ultimately fired the fatal shot, one fact remains clear. Joe Ekins and his Firefly demonstrated that with the right combination of firepower, skill, and positioning, even Germany's most formidable tanks could be taken down. By summer's end, the Sherman Firefly had proven itself more than a stopgap. It was a game-changer. In Normandy's bocage and open fields, its 17-pounder gun delivered the punch Allied crews desperately needed to stand up to Panthers and Tigers. From Lingevres to Saint-Aignan-de-Crampesnil, Fireflies showed that tactical insight, combined with superior firepower, could neutralize even Germany's most feared tanks. The Firefly's legacy extends beyond its battlefield successes. It demonstrated the value of innovation under pressure and how a well-executed conversion could alter the balance of armored warfare.